Okay, so let's finish correcting these examples of common comma splice sentences. So the second one we were talking about, Daniel loved his wife. He lavished her with attention and gifts on a daily basis. So we can, when reading out loud, we break it up where we think it should be sort of two separate thoughts. We know Daniel is the subject of the sentence. Loved is our simple predicate, and the complete predicate would be loved his wife. And then he lavished her with attention and gifts on a daily basis. That sounds like a complete thought on its own. So we have two complete sentences mashed together, and there's no punctuation to show where these two thoughts need to be broken up. So this would be an example of a fused sentence where a run-on where this person has put two complete ideas together where they need to divide it using the proper punctuation. So let's see what that would look like. So in this case, I decided to put a period and then capitalize the second sentence. So Daniel loved his wife, period. He lavished her with attention and gifts on a daily basis. So now we have two separate sentences instead of one run-on sentence. Third example, Ramona was on a diet. She cut out white bread and refined sugar. So you should be able to point out here, identify that we have another fused sentence. So this is the spot where we need to break up these two thoughts. Ramona was on a diet, period. She cut out white bread and refined sugar. That would make more sense. Or Ramona was on a diet, semicolon. She cut out white bread and refined sugar. Either of those would work. And then once again, we can review subjects and predicates. Ramona is our subject. She's the one doing the action and the one the sentence is about. And then our predicate is the main verbs. So was on a diet is our complete predicate, and then cut out, and then complete predicate would be cut out white bread and refined sugar. So let's split those two up. So we fixed it up. Now we have two independent clauses, and we have a period there to indicate that we need to break those two up. So Ramona was on a diet, period, capital. She cut out white bread and refined sugar. So both of those are now clearly separated. Fourth one, Canada's most famous racing ship is the Bluenose. It was primarily designed to fish the Atlantic coast. Okay, so in this case, we have to sort of separate these two independent clauses once again that are blended together. So Canada's most famous racing ship is the Bluenose. So is a predicate, and we're talking about this famous racing ship. So I do think we can break up our two sentences at this spot here. So it was primarily designed to fish the Atlantic coast. That is a complete thought on its own. Instead of a subject, we have a pronoun, but it still stands as a subject. It's what the sentence is about. And the predicate was is there. So once again, we have a run-on sentence that can be divided into two separate sentences. In this case, I think a semicolon would be appropriate. So I think a semicolon is appropriate because the word it is there, and it can kind of be ambiguous or lack some clarity. If you just had a sentence, it was primarily designed to fish the Atlantic coast. The semicolon makes that connection more clear because the it is referring back to this famous racing ship called the Bluenose. So our previous sentence. So these two sentences are very closely interrelated, and you almost need the first sentence in order to understand the second sentence. So that's why a semicolon is good, because makes that connection very clear to the reader that these two thoughts are closely connected, but they are separate independent clauses connected together. So that's where we would use a semicolon. And then the last one, Tommy hated his job, therefore he decided to quit and become a taxidermist. So this one is very similar to our first one, where there's a transition word and then two complete independent clauses are connected together. Tommy hated his job could stand as its own sentence. Our subject, Tommy, and then the predicate, hated his job. And then we have a transition word, therefore, and then we have another independent clause. He decided to quit and become a taxidermist. So that could also stand on its own, he being the subject, and then decided to quit and become a taxidermist would be our predicate. So once again, you could put a semicolon to illustrate the connection between these two thoughts. So we've revised this run-on by separating them with a semicolon, and you still have the transition word with a comma after it, so that's another thing we can sort of think about. And then the semicolon is there to indicate that these two are interrelated. The he, a pronoun, by connecting it with the semicolon, we are referring the he back to Tommy. So again, the clarity of that sentence is still being supported by the semicolon and the connection between those two independent clauses. So we can also talk about types of sentences and conjunctions. So a simple sentence is just what we've been talking about, an independent clause that has a subject and a predicate and can stand on its own as a complete thought. So the examples, the dog howled, the secretary was fired. So those are examples of simple sentences, your basic units of a sentence. Everything is there and it can stand on its own. Most of us write sentences that are more complicated, more complex. The first type of sentence that we can discuss is the compound sentence, and these are joined by what are called coordinating conjunctions, and you can remember them by remembering the anagram FANBOYS. So I'll just remind you that FANBOYS stands for the following conjunction. So coordinating conjunctions and FANBOYS, this is sort of, you can memorize this list, and these can be used to add to your sentence in order to build a compound sentence, also to avoid comma splices. So FANBOY stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So any of those words can be used to join together two independent clauses. So in our examples here, the boys giggled at the magazine, but they did not know why it was funny. And the second one, the dog stopped at the fire hydrant, yet he did not pee on it. Okay, so two examples where coordinating conjunctions are used and you're connecting two complete thoughts. So two sentences that could actually stand on their own, but we're using coordinating conjunctions to join them together. So the first part, the boys giggled at the magazine. You could have a period there and then start a new sentence. They did not know why it was funny. Instead, you could add a coordinating conjunction, a comma first, and then your coordinating conjunction, and join those two simple sentences together. The second one, the dog stopped by the fire hydrant. Again, you have a comma first, then your coordinating conjunction, and then your second independent clause. So he did not pee on it. So that could be a sentence on its own as well. You could also have a complex sentence, and this is sort of used to combine an independent clause and a dependent clause. So you still have a part of the sentence that can stand on its own, and it's attached to a sentence, an incomplete sentence or a dependent clause. So here we have an example: because the dog howled so loudly, the student couldn't fall asleep. So the first part, because the dog howled so loudly, would be the dependent clause because it has one of these dependent words attached to it. And if you just had the sentence, the dog howled loudly, that could be a sentence, except for it's an incomplete thought. It needs to be joined together with a complete or independent clause. So the student couldn't fall asleep. So here's our subject and predicates, and together they make a complex sentence. Another example: although the student did not get a full night's sleep, comma, he still managed to get an A on his paper. So the first part of that sentence, although the student did not get a full night's sleep, it has a subject, so the student, and a predicate, did not get a full night's sleep. It can't stand on its own because of its dependent word here, although makes it into a dependent clause that has to be attached to a standalone sentence. So he still managed to get an A on his paper. So that would be an independent clause that it's attached to. So examples of dependent words are while, if, when, where, which, that, until, although, even though, before, and after. There's more that you could think of, but that's just a short list of some dependent words. And then probably the most complex sentence that you could build would be a compound complex sentence. So this would be the components of a complex sentence attached to a compound sentence. So the one that used the FANBOYS. So you would have a dependent word clause plus a compound sentence using FANBOYS. So our example: since I was unemployed for the summer, that's where we got our dependent clause there. Comma, I decided to start a band and now I am performing shows every weekend. So this isn't a run-on sentence. It's a completely correct grammatically correct sentence, but it's a long sentence and a complicated one. So there are sort of three clauses in here. I was employed for the summer. I decided to start a band. I am performing shows every weekend. So those are the starts of three different clauses, but they're all attached correctly because we have one that's dependent, and then we have one that's attached with a coordinating conjunction or fanboy. So it is grammatically correct and accurate. So if you're on your own time and want to practice sentence structure, try writing out an example of a simple sentence, turning it into a compound sentence, and then transforming it into a complex sentence and a compound complex sentence. So you don't necessarily have to know the names of each of these sentences, but it is sort of good to add sentence variety to your writing and try to build more complex sentences rather than just going back to the simple sentence structure. So you're adding more fluency and interest to your writing by adding variety. Also, being able to identify a clause is going to be important to avoid comma splices and fragment errors, which are very common amongst first-year writing. So if you can identify a clause, the subject-verb combination, it's going to be important to avoid some of those common grammar mistakes. So get practicing.